And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. And you're joining us today on our podcast, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. And today, my guest is Cathy Paper. Cathy is the founder of RockPaperStar, which is a boutique consulting firm. She's been around the content space for quite some time. She's a speaker, she's a columnist for American City Business Journals. She's a Forbes Council coach. Let's see, what else can I say about Cathy other than she's one of the smartest people I know in this space,
No.
and she's been behind Harvey McKay for quite some time in terms of that brand. Which, and we were just talking before we hit the record button there. What a legendary brand that is that you were instrumental in building. So, thank you so much for joining us today, Kathy.
Well, thank you for having me, Peter. I'm looking forward to talking. And I guess I'd tell you one thing people don't know about me is I love to play tennis. So
Okay, there we go. Cool, very cool. So let's dive in. So you've had a chance to be in the content space from pretty interesting vantage point for quite some time, right? And there were tried and true formulas that worked, and then things change, and then you have to make up new formulas, and then things change. So give us a sense of things that used to be sort of money in the bank. If you did this, this would happen. That are just absolutely untrue today.
so in regards to the content and helping people, I primarily help people develop their content or package themselves. It used to be, so I've been doing it for about 10 years, hundreds of authors, speakers, and business owners. And, it used to be where you could sort of pick one area to say, just be a speaker or have a book or have a training class, and you could get your message out there. And you could
Pick one modality and just stick in that lane is what you're saying?
exactly. And write, there were a lot of people that used to write, a book every year. That was their way of staying fresh and current. That was the new thing. And as the internet's gone, faster and faster for how people communicate, the content creation cycle is a lot faster. I see people needing, they need a blog, they need a podcast or to be guests on podcast shows. They need all those different social media channels, and still to be consistent. That would be one thing I'd say is the same, Peter.
So let me ask you this, because I have an opinion on this, shockingly, right? My opinion is, and I start with a lot of clients by debunking some myths, saying, okay, stop calling yourself an author, stop calling yourself a speaker. Let's pause. You're in the content business, right? And each of those things, as well as licensing, as well as assessment tools, as well as coaching, and there's 20 others, are things that you could do to monetize the content. But the core of your business is to create killer content. Then we need to step back and say, okay, let's let's think like a systems thinker and say, how does a book connect to a speech, connect to my video-based training system, connect to my licensing, etc., and be really thoughtful and strategic around how you get that content out there, free and paid, so that you're generating the revenue that you want across a diversified portfolio of options and solutions. Because books are great, books are awesome, but that's you can't put all the money on a book or a speech. So how would you sort of respond to that?
That you need to have more than one.
Well, you have to have an integrated approach. That you have to have you can't just be a one trick pony and be the I mean, you could be the world's greatest speaker, I imagine, or whatever. But that all those things come together in a strategic way.
I totally agree. I mean, I like that you tell people to not just say I'm a speaker or I'm an author, because people will come to me and they say, "Well, I've always wanted to be an author," and I'm like, "Well, you're first and foremost you're an expert. Let's use that word, or I like your word you use of thought leadership, and some of the most accomplished people have a hard time sort of thinking about themselves in that way. Um, and yet, what people want to know is, well, what did you do sort of day in and day out, or where are those lessons in there? So I like having the integrated content. I heard, we were just talking, I just came back from the National Speakers Association, and I heard Rory Vaden, who's a great, a great change maker. You should look at having him on your show. And he talked about content and how you can repurpose it and put it in all these different ways. And I just think sometimes people think only book and they don't think about sound bites or quotes that could be used on Instagram or making a 1 minute video rather than explaining everything.
Well, I think some of it is fear. Like we all have our default ways that we like to do things, right? If you writers like to write and speakers like to speak, and now you're telling someone, normally you have an hour in front of an audience as a keynoter. What can you come up in a minute that's pretty punchy and quick on a video? Like, there's a learning curve there, right? And a lot of folks with deep expertise haven't experienced a lot of learning curve as of late. They've been at that expert level, right? And not the sort of the beginner's mind level.
Well, and beginners is a great word because, you want to simplify things down. And I'm still I have a PDF of a workbook that, some people print out and still write in it. It's not all online. And I do think you want to think back of with your content is what will people highlight? What are your headlines? What are the 10 takeaways that people walk away with? So your original question of what's sort of the tried and true is you still have to have an outline. You still have to know what are the words that you stand for. So I help people figure out, what are your fans or maybe you're a leader of a company. What are they saying about you? What are your clients writing in? And then those are the words that can help gel into, the strategy of what do you want to be known for.
And those words are modality agnostic, right? Whether that becomes a book or a speech or whatever, you need to know who you are. You need to know what you're about, right? And what your expertise is.
Right. So I have a consultant who consults with, Fortune 500 companies, 18-month long engagements. And he was just, he's working on his book and he's thinking about what he stands for. And I said, not everybody can interact with a CEO at that level the way you do.
Right.
What is it that you do that allows you to both have a conversation and keep it lighthearted and fun and be able to have him, trust you with, his biggest business secrets because that's what you're teaching to other people. And often experts are so close to it that they don't realize that their content, or these tips are meaningful. So I love the beginner word because I say, okay, so if I've met you for the first time, start me in the 101, then take me to 201, then 301.
I think that I agree with that. And one thing that I would say is sometimes you have someone that is, a really smart subject matter expert, whatever their domain expertise is, doesn't really matter. And then, they can come into a situation. So in your example, it's somebody that coaches CEOs and they're just in their zone, right? And everything they do is on the money and it's just perfect, right? It's like a beautifully choreographed dance. And then you say to them, how do you do that? And they say, I just did it. Like, what do you mean? Like, they don't even have to think about it because there's that deep level of ingrained knowledge. And part of what we try to do is say, listen, there's only so many things that an expert can do. You can be hired to advise, you can be hired to coach, you can whatever, but it's limiting because you have to be in the same room as your content. If I'm going to help you scale at a level that you haven't scaled before, we have to break down what you do into a framework, into something that we can codify and break down into little parts and make it teachable, right? Because most of the experts at that level are not in the business of teaching. They get paid for the outcomes and the results. And getting people to slow down and turn that into a wait, what was the first thing that you did when you walked in that room? Oh, here's 10 things I did. I looked around, I monitored, I did whatever. But doing that and breaking it down into really small pieces, sometimes it frustrates thought leaders, but it's incredibly valuable to codify what you do into processes and steps so that you can replicate it and teach it to others.
Yeah, no, I like that, and that would be a great way to say too. What hasn't changed in terms of content is that you still have to be able to explain why you're good at something, so that the expertise, and one of the reasons why I think Harvey McKay has been so successful as an educator as well as a business person is he explains, what is it that he did to learn how to sell, that what they still sell, they print 25 million envelopes a day, they have a sales force, they do research on people, but he can walk in. So even before he's gotten into the room, you set the table with what's your background, what gives you the credibility to be able to do. So I don't think, that's one of the things I'd say it hasn't changed is, anyone can call themselves an expert, I think, but you have to be able to back it up and say, okay, well, I've done, 150 book launches, or I know that 80% of authors sell under 1,000 books. So, I'm going to tell you right now, this is hard work to be able to do this. I actually think too, though, just when you're thinking about what things have changed, one thing that's changed is, though, with all this social media options, I think people need to think a little bit more about where their audience is.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So let me go back to the point that you just made in terms of having in Harvey's case, the why Harvey. Why would anyone listen to him? Well, just like you said, I mean, they're printing zillions of envelopes. It's a real business. He can show the growth. I mean, he's got the batting average, right? And you'd want to learn from someone with a great track record versus someone with a bad track record or a marginal track record. I see all too often in this sort of social media space where it's easier to get attention today than it was, right? Through the tools and all that. But when you're putting yourself out there as a 26-year-old life coach, it's almost comical, right? When you have to say to yourself, okay, well, why me? Why would somebody pay money to devour my content, to listen to my expertise? You've got to have a track record, and I think people sometimes forget that you have to have a history and a track record and credentials. And sometimes those credentials could be academic or business or whatever. But without that, just because you can get attention on YouTube or whatever, it's not enough.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a track record. I think you have to be appealing. And the likability part, is really an interesting one because at least I always think about, which what space am I showing up in? So like LinkedIn to me, I'm still conservative about it's a professional space. So whenever I see a headshot that's not very professional, I'm like, wait a minute, put that over on Facebook, you know. But yet all these worlds, I notice, Peter.
So you shouldn't have a margarita in your
Yes,
LinkedIn profile picture. Not a good thing. But we've seen it, right? It's sort of
you do.
silly, but
You
it's
see it a
we've
lot.
seen
And
it.
then I wonder, am I just old fashioned or am I like, what?
Yeah,
Facebook is
right.
where, kind of my friends are. But yes, because I have an
Sure.
international network, I do a little bit more communicating, on anyway. So that to me, social media feels like it's a changing space.
Got it. So, what are the things that are working now? So, we talked about things are changing. We talked about this no longer works. The formula of publishing a book every year. What is one to do? Or actually, let's use your work with Harvey as an example of someone who's been done an amazing job of staying relevant, and transforming and getting things out there in different ways. What are the type of things you're experimenting with, and what are you finding works?
Well, I actually think what's working is allowing people ways to get in contact with the expert. So I'm a big fan of the line, your lives are changed by the books you read and the people you meet. And what one of the things we're doing with Harvey is working on the Harvey McKay Academy of getting people connected so that it's a facilitated room where you're going through content that's going to make you a better business person, a better salesperson, a better negotiator, a better leader. But in that room, you're surrounded by other people that have the same goal. So,
So let me touch on that for a second because I think that's a critical piece. Back in the Stone Age, when I was in school, or in the 1800s, learning was pretty straightforward. Whoever was in the front of the room was smarter than you, and your job was to shut up and sort of take in that knowledge, right? And not question them. And the people to your left and right couldn't teach anything, right? They were just in there as well, and you were equals. Now, what we've learned from an adult learning perspective is the peer learning is really, really powerful. The community is really, really powerful. That like-minded growth mindset of being surrounded by people on a parallel learning journey can actually help everybody in the process. And quite frankly, it makes the job of the thought leader a little bit easier if everybody's committed to the learning of them, not only their own learning, but the community. So can you touch on that just a
yeah,
little
for
bit more?
sure. Because it's one of the things that I think is great. and I'm borderline Stone Age. So I learned the same way of I used to think group projects were horrible, um, because people didn't always do as much work. But now with the concepts of masterminds and forums
Exactly.
and young presidents organizations and entrepreneurs organizations, the idea of putting people together that will either share a goal or solve a problem, as well as that a network is makes it much more efficient to get something done.
But that forces you to design your solutions differently, right? So when you're designing a learning solution that integrates peer-to-peer learning and community, that's very different from the onset in terms of how you design and
Correct.
deliver that.
So I'll give you an example from my own experience. So I've been running leadership groups, from when I was at Fallon McGilligan Agency to at Best Buy making, leadership programs, to now we're running one called the Director's Dozen in Minnesota. And when you design a group where you have 2 hours and 12 people that need to talk, as well as work through an exercise, you have to think about how does everybody get time to think? How do you make sure that there's always two people that want to talk all the time, and two people that never say anything, and how do you make sure they have a good experience? So there's a little bit of, not a little bit, the design is around exercises that will help the learning, or case studies that will get people to really think and talk, or what we do is something called the sounding board, where you come with something, and while we're the facilitators of the group, we're not the only ones that can answer and solve a problem on what do I do? I'm new to the organization. How do I introduce myself? And then the richness comes from, you know, five other companies where people have been new and they're like, oh, well, we go in, we do a day long session, here's what we do. I like the whole community. It's like to me at least, it turns into a really good dinner party where people care
Right.
about each other, they want to talk to each other. But yes, you do have to design it.
A lot of interaction. Well, and the other thing is, if you look at some of the research, like Susan Cain on introversion, the two people that are always the ones speaking aren't necessarily the ones that have the most contribute to this conversation. It's just they're more charismatic or loud or whatever. And the two that are quiet doesn't mean they don't have anything to say. So the design and the facilitation of that process helps you sort of quiet down the loudmouth, if you will, and extract knowledge from someone that might be a little bit more reserved or not as social or whatever introverted, whatever the case is. And I think that's really, really important. So we're running a little short on time here. So I want to sort of get into a couple of just quick tactics. So what are, if I'm listening to this and I'm an author, an aspiring author, a thought leader, an expert, etc., what are two or three things that you would say to them, Cathy, you absolutely must, and maybe two or three things that you say you absolutely must not?
Okay, so you absolutely must work with somebody that will help you polish and strategize and make your brand as powerful as it needs to be. So I think the people that try to do it all on themselves, you're missing out because you're too close to it. And that would be one of my.
Got it. So
Yep,
get some
get some
help.
help. One of the musts would be as professional and polished as you can be. So I see a lot of books that just get rushed out the door and don't have the thought or the depth, or the enough endorsements. Maybe they just have one endorsement. I'm like, why do you only have one endorsement? Have 3 to 5, have 10 on the inside. Some of those touches that suggest to me somebody rushing. That would be one of the things you have to do. And I think you have to really be thinking about the audience. The biggest challenge is when you want to be an expert. You have something to share, but we forget about the person receiving, which is why I like that word beginner, because the beginner is nervous, or the beginner wants to know, well, what did you do to overcome your fears, or the beginner is a little more guarded. And so I tell all my clients when they're early in the book stage is write your dedication. Be very clear. Why are you doing this work for the person? Um, because it's pretty easy to get kind of caught up in yourself, and you want to be able
Right.
to know why. Okay, so the things I would stop doing is I would stop thinking you have to be everything and everywhere.
So focused and niche in terms of your target market, or in terms of the functional side of the business and all the things that need to happen
I
to be
do both.
successful.
I'd first start with, don't say this is for all businesses. Pick a few that you have the expertise and the credibility in, or that's an area. And then the same on the tactical things. You don't have to, people think they had to be on Snapchat and they have to be on everywhere. Like, be strategic about it. So I guess that would leads to my second thing is, I would say, don't do any of this work without having a plan. Even if
Totally.
it's even if it's a 3-month plan or a 6-month plan, or I encourage my clients to make a 12-month plan.
And the plans need to be integrated, because oftentimes, and I'd love to get your 2 cents on this, is they'll have a plan around Twitter, right? Or they'll have a plan around a book or a speech, but all those things need to be connected. It's one business.
So okay, so one aside, because I do the 10-point assessment, and I thought, you know what, if they're going to assess me at the gym and tell me what I need to work on, I'm going to assess my clients and tell them what they need to work on, because I got so tired of looking at a Twitter page, a Facebook page, their website, and a LinkedIn, and saying these do not look anything alike. So I'm
Exactly.
with you on that. To
Exactly.
me, it's a plan that shows it all, that's very strategic. You're going to be more efficient with the plan. The other thing, the don't thing I would do is, don't be afraid to compare yourself to somebody else. Meaning, everybody wants to, feel like they've invented the newest or the only or the greatest way. And I think there's nothing wrong with helping your reader say that, you know what, your book is like somebody else's.
I agree. Because when they say, we'll use, isn't that just like so and so's book that might be, a classic? You say, yes, and here's what's different, right? You have to have a new, doesn't mean you have to put down that book, but you're adding to the conversation. If you liked that, you're going to like this book because here's what it adds, or that book left out, or that book was written 20 years ago and now it integrates some new digital thinking, or whatever the case may be. But great advice, Cathy. So I'm so glad to have had you on today, and that you've shared with us so many practical, tactical, and strategic nuggets based on your vantage point and your experience. So, how do people find you, by the way?
You can find me at rockpaperstar.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Cathy with a C, and paper, just like you write on.
And not with a margarita in your picture
Not
on the
with the
LinkedIn profile.
margarita, no. And then I also have, like the free 14 days worth of book tips, books and marketing tips. So things like, enter awards, have it be a good thing. So that's how people can find me. But like I said, I'd go back to you got to have a plan. So work with somebody so you're not flailing around. I see so many people that have come to me and they've spent a lot of money and they haven't accomplished what they wanted. And I'm like, well, we could have fixed a few of these things, 3 consultants ago.
Exactly. Well, and I would encourage you to get in touch with her. I've had the pleasure of knowing you for probably 10, 15 years, and one of the best in the business. So I would encourage you all to reach out and have a conversation with Cathy. She's wise and experienced, which is a good combination. So thanks again for joining us today, and I appreciate all of your time and all of the knowledge that you shared with
Well,
us today. Thank you so
thanks
much.
for doing this for everybody.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.